And so I remember coming into spaces where I knew my life personally was falling apart, but I was being called upon to do really courageous things like lead 1,300 people after Hurricane Sandy in New York. And so it required me to just put on this brave face in this space where I knew I'm one of few, if not the only individuals who look like me anyway. So the risks are high, the stakes are high. I can't afford to fail. So that was hard because I think I intercepted people who unfortunately did not have a well-developed emotional intelligence to be mindful of how they were emoting in the world and how they emoted as leaders were impacting other people. So for a long time, I had to learn how to just stuff it and go. And what it taught me, honestly, Brima, it was I learned from the leaders that I did not want to become. I probably learned more from them because of the harm I endured, because I think of it was just a lack of an awareness of their own emotional intelligence, their lack of grace that I thought, if ever a young person or a person with lived experience or a person who has survived something traumatic comes into my organization or my space, I do not want them to have the experience that I had. So I learned as much as I could, not only about observing them, but from a brain science and knowledge perspective, when I figured out with the language what had happened to me, that it was not the totality of my life, I tried to study and become as aware as I could about trauma, what happens with the brain, how it rewires, and how it shows up in stress and peacetime and in professional spaces. So that alone, to answer your question, is I took those really bad, what felt like direct harm encounters. Today, I can reframe that lens and say, those leaders did the best that they could with the tools that they had. Today, I say as a leader, there's no excuse to not be able to know what emotional intelligence is. You have to be more curious about people that you're leading than condemning. And that's how I've tried to evolve, is learning from the people, learning from the experiences of how it really hurt me to not be seen beyond what was presenting on the surface.
My name is Ibrahima Abraham Cisse. I'm the founder of Heliona IQ and host of Heliona Insight, the podcast dedicated to helping managers and teams feel better and work better together. The most remarkable leaders don't just lead organizations, they lead legacies. Today's guest, Merideth Rose, is the president and CEO of Cornerstones of Care, an organization with a 150-year history of transforming lives through compassion, advocacy, and equity. Merideth's early leadership journey includes overseeing a team of 1,300 at FEMA during the aftermath of Superstorm Sandy, one of the largest community relations deployment in U.S. history. Her ability to lead through crises and provide hope to communities in need highlights her unwavering dedication to service and equity. But Merideth's leadership isn't just about maintaining a legacy, it's about reimagining what's possible. With a deep commitment to truth, equity, and grace, she's setting a bold vision for the future while ensuring the values of the past remain at the heart of everything she does. In this episode, we will dive into her incredible journey, her vision for Cornerstones of Care, and what it truly means to lead a 150-year legacy into the future. Can you share a bit about your early career as an actress? Because I did do some research and I saw that you have a whole IMDb page.
Yeah, which is fairly new.
What was that experience like?
Oh my goodness. So, I think it's intertwined with, what we know about the therapeutic arts is they really have the power to heal. And I just got discovered, I think, by happenstance. I was going through a lot of life and I found myself married with 4 children. And I had just graduated from Park University with my graduate degree. And I saw a picture of myself and I was 200 plus pounds. So I was unhealthy, trying to navigate through trauma. And so I joined Weight Watchers of all things. And I did their online program for about 12 months and lost about 100 pounds. And what's interesting is that when you subscribe, you consent for you to share, the story, the journey. And so someone saw the story. And they invited me to tell the story. So Weight Watchers flew me out to New York, did a photo shoot, and I just happened to do an interview on camera. And one of the producers from McCann Erickson said, have you ever thought about acting or doing anything, on the other side of the camera? And I was like, no, I don't do any of that. Never had a formal class, any training. And she said, I'm going to put you in contact with some friends at I&I Agency here in Kansas City, which she did. And so I started out doing little things, everything from Hallmark commercials to Missouri Lottery, and just gradually developed a knack for it. So what's interesting is I think my acting skills, my voiceovers, it gave me a chance to come out of what was the reality of my life, which was still a lot of heavy and traumatic and broken. And every time I had a chance to envision and embody a person or a character, it just gave me hope about a different possibility. And I fell in love with it. So almost 30 years, if you can believe it or not, of acting voiceovers.
Wow.
Never anything big,
Right.
but it's been
gonna
just
happen.
One day. Never say never. I'm in a different mission field right now, but honestly, I'm a storyteller today, and so I still get to tap into that skill and that gift every single day.
No, even me as a filmmaker, because I came from film and then I decided to go into mental health because I saw the correlation. And then I've always found so much community in film in general. And it sounds like you also did so with your experience with trauma and then, like realizing, okay, I need to do something for myself. Yeah. Like Weight Watchers, like that's awesome. Like, I didn't see that on IMDb. So they need to, you need to go in and like update that because that's a big deal.
It was. And you may remember like before, I think it was Oprah and Jennifer Hudson, J. Hud. And I mean, this was probably more than 20 years ago. So they were featuring national TV commercials with success stories. I remember my mom saw that first commercial and she that was her baby on TV. So it's been a while.
No, that's incredible.
Good memories.
Yeah. And how long was that experience? Especially like Weight Watchers, like did you have to do the whole program as well?
Yeah, so there's iterations. I did just online, so I never went in person and for meetings and things, but I still tapped into a network of women, which was so empowering. I just remember like that first 5-10 pounds, as you know, about any kind of recovery, whether it's moving from crisis and trauma to solid mental health, like the first few steps are always the hardest. Right. And so I'm just glad I had a network of people to be able to navigate through that. Because once I got started, I was like, oh, I can do this. So, yeah.
Wow. So how did you transition from, like the limelight, Hollywood, the journey to that, to like now, like, public service and community service? Yeah. Like what sparked that interest?
Yeah. I've said this before. As a member of faith, there's a story in the Bible that talks about the 10 talents. And I believe that certain individuals, all of us are given gifts, but me in particular, it seems like while my life was born into broken, I had so many different gifts or talents, whether it was acting or singing or leadership or teaching. And so that exposure with acting gave me space and opportunities to see different lifestyles, different stories, but I knew they were synonymous with people's true realities. There are broken people dealing with obesity. There are broken people dealing with mental health and with poor marriages. So that really transitioned into, I have a gift and a talent to see and understand the stories of people. My mother, who's 40 years my senior, is a sojourner of herself, of her own right. She survived the civil rights era. She navigated through discrimination, segregation. So I learned about having a heart for the human condition through my mom. And that's always been embedded in me. So regardless of if I'm singing or acting, my heart has always been to help uplift people and help them heal. Right.
Yeah. Wow. That's beautiful. Yeah. Even me, my past is filled with people that have like served in communities from Africa. Like my mom used to work for the Red Cross and she would travel all over the world. And, every now and then I'm just like, where is she going? Like she was always doing something. And she always told me that I'm supposed to do this from a young kid. She always reminded me that to help people, to always be available and not be in front of the cameras, not to build my ego and my entire, like identity around the things that I do. Yes. And she always even till today, she's not doing so well. She has a kidney problem, but she's still trying to help people. And I'm just like, lady, go sit down.
That's a good mama. She raised you right. And
she's amazing.
It's innate in you. You know, if you're cultivated a sense of service and sacrifice and selflessness from the time we are children.
Right.
And then, you talk about coming from Africa. There is this philosophy or this teaching called Ubuntu. And it says, I am because you are, we are because we are. So if you have a need, I have a need. Right. So that has just been embedded from my mother, from my caring communities. And what's interesting, many of those people in those communities didn't look anything like me, but I learned about this life as you did of service and sacrifice and others before self. And so that's what I try to beat my life and my service from every single day.
Yeah. And like, you like mentioned like the communities that you were in that, they don't look like you, but, still you found so much, like love and connection in those spaces. And in this podcast, like one of the biggest things that I like to dive into is like, how do leaders become leaders? Who like inspired them? And what are the things that, was like the aha moment for them? Like, oh, wow, this is amazing. This is something that I would love to do. For you, it started with your mom and then you found yourself in these communities. What was that experience like being someone who doesn't look like people that are helping you and then accepting the help in the first place?
No, that's a great question. And I think, the blessing about, if there were any blessing in being broken and navigating through a traumatic life and childhood full of adverse childhood experiences or ACEs, is that I was able to intersect people like Gwen Grant, who was the first CEO and president of Kansas City Urban League. And she's still there today after well over 20, 30 years. Even in that kind of brokenness and wandering and trying to figure out my purpose, those individuals were deeply steeped in service and public service and lifting communities and helping those in marginalization and lack of access and equity. So I would watch and observe them. They would invite me to the table, but then also they would really see a leadership leap and potential in me, and they would create a stage and an opportunity for me to lead. And many times it was doing things that I had no business doing. I was ill-equipped, underprepared, undereducated, and I think they gave me both time and space to heal. They gave me authentic love, but they gave me high grace and high accountability. So Gwen, although she saw I was a hot mess trying to heal from a lot of trauma, she said, I think you should consider Park University. And so that stair step became, okay, then I went to Park University. It gave me space to develop my competencies, my capabilities. So then I became, again, prepared to go to the next leap, which was working with Homeland Security. So I answer your question to say that I think leadership is being mindful and open to the moments, not just your time at bat, like the earth-shattering, defining moments, but just showing up in little spaces every single day, being courageous, being willing to say, I may not be where I need to be today, but I may not be able to get to where I need to be tomorrow without the help of caring community. And that opened me up to a diverse, resilient group of people who just didn't look like me. And what that turned out to be was the stepping stones for me to have a great opportunity, a great visionary mindset, and a kind of an all-in, everybody-in approach to leadership, that everybody has value, their story has value, their experience has value, everybody has room to contribute. And so I say that my life and my leadership kind of journey, my healing journey, is parallel to how I believe and lead through leadership today. People gave me a chance, so absolutely I'm going to give everybody a chance, regardless of their background and their history and their story.
Yeah, I mean, I can like relate to that as well, because I also moved here from Africa to the US. And pretty much all my first like interaction were people that had zero experience that I've experienced, but they were always open to like helping. Right. And I know, there's a cost to that as well.
Yes.
And especially when it, as someone who is aspiring to be a leader and you've experienced trauma and you're dealing with people that don't, like understand the trauma, like what was that cost to you personally? And then how did you, like move past that to become the aspiring leader that you've always wanted to be?
Yeah, that's hard because as you're in the trauma yourself, you don't know a lot about giving others grace. Trauma is such an interesting condition of life that unlike some of those visible characteristics you can see, you can probably assume I'm an African-American female. You can probably assume I perhaps played sports because of my muscles, just for example. But trauma is one of those things that it is no discerner of persons. It impacts everybody differently, and it doesn't necessarily materialize in very typical ways. And so I remember coming into spaces where I knew my life personally was falling apart, but I was being called upon to do really courageous things like lead 1,300 people after Hurricane Sandy in New York. And so it required me to just put on this brave face in this space where I knew I'm one of few, if not the only individuals who look like me anyway. So the risks are high, the stakes are high. I can't afford to fail. So that was hard because I think I intercepted people who unfortunately did not have a well-developed emotional intelligence to be mindful of how they were emoting in the world and how they emoted as leaders were impacting other people. So for a long time, I had to learn how to just stuff it and go. And what it taught me, honestly, Brima, it was I learned from the leaders that I did not want to become. I probably learned more from them because of the harm I endured, because I think of it was just a lack of an awareness of their own emotional intelligence, their lack of grace that I thought, if ever a young person or a person with lived experience or a person who has survived something traumatic comes into my organization or my space, I do not want them to have the experience that I had. So I learned as much as I could, not only about observing them, but from a brain science and knowledge perspective, when I figured out with the language what had happened to me, that it was not the totality of my life, I tried to study and become as aware as I could about trauma, what happens with the brain, how it rewires, and how it shows up in stress and peacetime and in professional spaces. So that alone, to answer your question, is I took those really bad, what felt like direct harm encounters. Today, I can reframe that lens and say, those leaders did the best that they could with the tools that they had. Today, I say as a leader, there's no excuse to not be able to know what emotional intelligence is. You have to be more curious about people that you're leading than condemning. And that's how I've tried to evolve, is learning from the people, learning from the experiences of how it really hurt me to not be seen beyond what was presenting on the surface.
Wow. I mean, that takes a special kind of mindset to
in a lot
experience
of years.
all that.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of years to even now, full circle, have empathy for those, for those people that, may not have been kind to you. And like, I have a lot of sisters, I'm like, I have 8 siblings, and my sister next to me, I mean, I love her, but we don't get along. But like, it's not like hate, not get along.
Just
I
difference.
don't
just
like
disconnect a little bit.
I don't like understand it. But I like miss her. But when I see her, I'm just like, like teasing with her. But she shares a lot with me, and she actually had to leave the the workforce because she just could not handle it. She's very smart. Like, she's probably way smarter than me, which I would hate to admit. But she left the workforce, and she just she's just focused on being a parent now.
Good for her.
Because she's like, I did everything I can, and it's just not working. And she works in healthcare. To people like that, they may still feel that guilt of like, maybe I haven't done enough. Like, what, as you being someone who experienced that, and now you were leading a very big organization, like, how did you get to that? And then what would you say to someone who may have, tried and they decided to like, all right, I'm just going to walk away, which there's nothing wrong with that. But what would you say to them if they may be feeling that guilt?
Yeah, I got to tell you, especially for females and Black women in particular, that imposter syndrome is real. This kind of FOMO culture, this fear of missing out. I think it's because historically we have had to vie and fight for position and authority and appreciation and value, shoulder to shoulder with our peers. That someone told us, whether it was society, whether it was our own intrinsic narrative, or even our parents out of protection, that we had to stay in the rat race. We had to stay at the same, if you can visualize like a sprint, we have to stay at the same volume, pace, speed, and proximity so that we don't get left behind. And what happens is I think we've been grinding and running our race that all of a sudden we looked up and we found out and we saw how far we were really from the center of ourselves.
Right.
And by design, whether it's women or men, we were designed to be in control and in balance. We are just one part of a bigger ecosystem.
Right.
And so I can run the rat race at home and give all that I can, but if I come home and have nothing left for my children and my spouse or my partner, or at the end of my life, I have no ability to travel or see the world or learn something new, have I really done my part to live well in the ecosystem? So how I combat that today is, you've got to be comfortable in blooming where you are planted. I think everybody is given a vineyard and a season and a time in which they are designed to make impact and influence.
Right.
And the good thing about life and ecosystems and seasons is that they change and they turn over. And at some point, you're going to come to a point where you're like, I've done all that I can. And it's okay. I had that about 8 years ago. I was pushing for radical change, for cultural competence. I was one of only one Black face in a school district where marginalization was high, discrimination was high, and the makeup of the student body and the families were turning over. And I just felt like I was hitting a wall. So much so that my physical and mental health started to decline.
Yep.
I had never had kidney disease before. I had never been hospitalized. And all of a sudden in that 6 or 7 years, I had seen the emergency room more times than I wanted to.
Yeah.
So the long and short of it is that it's okay to prioritize our self-wellness. It's like the emergency instructions they give on the flight. You've got to take care of yourself before you try to help somebody else.
Right.
And we always talk about pouring from an empty cup, but it's even more ineffective to pour from a broken cup.
Oh, man.
Or people become crunchy, as I tell my staff. And if you've come to a point where you need to step out and sit down, that's totally okay. Because I don't want to crunchy you. That's not good for your resilience. That's not good for the people you're trying to serve. And you've got children, whether it's your own or the ones that are to come behind, that we need to inspire to come into this work after us, not make them afraid of it. So it's okay to prioritize self. It's okay to say, my season is done. I've bloomed as long as I can bloom. It's time to either sit out or move to the next vineyard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. I know she listened to this podcast. There you go, big head.
That's for you, sister. For you. It is. Enjoy your time of respite and pour into those babies. Yeah.
No, yeah. She's, she's a really good mom and she loves the kids. Yeah. But she still has a big head. So
I hope I just made it bigger.
And very big now because I was like, oh my God, now she's going to act like.
I love it.
But I do want to go back to, you did mention that you lead a team of 13,000 through a disaster zone. Is that with FEMA as well?
1,300. 1,300. Okay. I can imagine leading 13,000. Yeah, no, 1,300.
1,300. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was with FEMA, right? Because I read that you did work for FEMA. What was that experience like? Because, we just had a FEMA experience and people were just coming up with all kind of, things that does not exist. And, and you being in that field in your past, have you experienced anything like that before?
Oh my goodness.
And if so, how did you get past that? Because that's a leadership role where you're leading such a big team. Yeah. And then having to make sure that they're, still excited to help when people are even, rejecting that help.
Yeah.
But how do you navigate that, which I can say it is a big conflict internally and externally.
Of course. So, watching the, really the images and the videos and hearing the news stories and reports about Helena and the other hurricanes, it was triggering and re-traumatizing, and I didn't expect it. And the reason why it is we are more than 17 years after Hurricane Katrina, about 12 years after Hurricane Sandy. And I didn't realize when I was in the zone, I was so almost brainwashed and focused with just doing the mission, saving lives, getting the troops out, doing the incident command and control. I didn't realize how traumatized I was being with the images, with the sights, with the stress, with everything. So looking back on it today, my husband will tell you, I had a couple of days where I was in the bed and just kind of, I watched it for a while and then I had to turn it off because it was too much. And I think if I take myself back to that time, I was in my late 20s, so early 30s. I was a pup, and it was the largest leadership experience I had ever had. And what's interesting, I told you about kind of the stair steps of leaders who notice you as you're healing and developing in the along the way. Somehow someone got my name, that they had seen me lead another kind of lower scale disaster. So I had Missouri, Iowa, Kansas, and Nebraska, Region 7, and I responded to the Joplin tornado. I might have done some flooding, but never any large scale hurricanes. I had done hurricanes like Isaac in Louisiana before, but nothing as large, and never was the outward leader. I was the strategic planner. I would pre-deploy before the hurricane. I would write the response plan. I would write the plan for how we're going to get community relations out, what we were going to do in conjunction with U.S. Forest Service and all the different federal agencies. So I was kind of the conductor writing the outward face plan for the agency. And then my job was to create a system for their accountability, for their safety, and really reporting what they see. So their function was to do critical search and rescue, to provide information about disaster recovery, how people can get aid, and then help them to lead survivors on the next first steps after a disaster. So when Hurricane Sandy happened, it had been a week after the hurricane had made landfall. Community relations, who's supposed to be the first outward face, had not even been deployed yet. So folks came from all states across the country. They descended upon the disaster site in Lower Manhattan, New York. I walk in 7 days later, and there's just a sea of FEMA people everywhere, about 1,300. Delays in getting them into the field. And, I have a good friend who was the incident commander there, and he wrote a book and told the story. And he said, and I don't remember this, but he said they looked at everybody there already deployed. So you're talking 4- and 5-star retired Army generals, and nobody wanted to stand up and take responsibility for leading these 1,300. And somehow they got my name from Kansas City. They called me, they deployed me. They said, here's the mission. You have less than 72 hours to get these 1,300 people out in all 5 boroughs of New York. And oh, by the way, the DHS secretary is coming, by Air Force One in 24 hours. Like, what do you do with that?
Like, no pressure at all.
No pressure. And I think this is where your fight response kicks in. This is where the training, I knew harm. I knew stress, I knew trauma, but I also knew caring community. I knew the power of a network. I knew how to assemble a table of really smart people, and I knew who I could trust. So in the disasters I had worked, I had made note of where I had led with relationships and made lasting connections with people who could get the job done. So when I got the assignment, I knew exactly who was going to be on my roster. And then it just really trickles down from there. So I think that the key that what I've learned looking back, of course, we got criticized and attacked. And the hard part about this work, whether you're talking about FEMA or social services, there are going to be large swaths of people who don't understand what happens on the ground. They're not there. They don't know what you face. But you keep your head down. You know exactly what you're there to do. You assemble the right people, and you have to have confidence enough to know that I have trained for this. I've prepared for this. And when you've got relationships bound with good, competent people, there is not anything in this world that you cannot accomplish. And that was just the mantra. So when you're in it, I don't think you think about it. You do it so much that it becomes just rhythmic, that when your card is called, your time comes, you just get it done. But
just gotta show up.
You just show up. Yeah. That's right. And you courage up is what I tell the team. You're not going to be able to do this work scared. I tell my friends, be scared, but do it anyway.
Right.
Do it anyway.
No, even with that breakdown, like you like, even though, there are like emotions like there, but you still accept those emotions and not like push them away, and you try to extend that to your team as well. Yes. But then be also very strategic at the same time. Yeah. And I'm sure that has everything to do with your past as well. But like, why do you think there is such doubt when it comes to people that are wanting to help in general, because it's something that I also experienced, but you've experienced at a whole different level, especially with FEMA.
Yeah.
Why do you think that happened? People just having doubts towards people trying to help them?
Because I think it's fear. I think, the whole premise of faith, whether you're a person of religious faith or not, is it's believing in something that is not yet to be experienced, or believing something that perhaps your senses can't see or perceive. And so, unfortunately, the country and policies and practices in other areas have had a history of really letting people down. And if you look at history around particularly people in poverty, people who have lack of access or means or race resources, people of a different race or gender, like this history, unfortunately, has a harmful past of creating further marginalization for those individuals. And so trust, when it's broken, is really difficult for me to be an extension of that system and say, just trust me. So I think what I was able to bring in FEMA in particular is lived experience together with this attitude, this outward mindset, and this love of relationships first. I'm going to get done what I need to get done for the government. But the first thing I'm going to do is meet people in their basic needs, feeling safe, feeling seen, feeling heard. I remember my first 24 hours after I deployed the folks, I went out to the field to check on my teams. That first day was probably just spent hugging on people, just allowing them to cry on my shoulder. People they'd come to tents and I would just sit and listen to their stories. I had a lot to do. I had a lot of command and control to do, but my most important job first was being human to another human. So I think your answer to your question is people. And here's what I've learned about the beautiful science of our brains. The left side is our cognitive and our STEM side, the computation, the analytics, the reason. The right side drives a lot of our thought about relationships and connection and safety and trust. And people, even before you say a word, they relate what they interpret about you, they perceive about you. They measure that against previous experience, lived experience, their own trauma, their own history, their knowledge of whether you did what you were going to say you were going to do in the past. So when people see FEMA and they know the history of Katrina, they know the history of the government, they know the history of all kinds of harmful practices, absolutely, they're going to feel a certain way. A lack of trust. So I looked at the opportunity as I'm going to do this job, but I'm going to be a very different community relations leader. And as I read the stories and hear the reports after me, I can hear the approach to how FEMA deploys has changed. They never used to deploy with mental emotional counselors with those community relations teams back in 2012. Today they do that. So they have learned that before you get the trust and the ability for people to respond and trust that you're going to do what you say you're going to do, you need to see them, you need to serve them, you need to support them, you need to be a shoulder for them, and that's it. And so I think that really gets back to the point where trust is built through empathic relationships and authentic connection, first and above everything else. Right.
It's like at the end of the day, we all want to feel like empathy from the people that we like, are like interacting with, working with. But I do like the point of like, people are somewhat judging you based off their own experience.
Yes.
It doesn't matter who you are. The moment they see you, you are literally colliding with a lifetime of experiences.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is very powerful. And I do see that happening in corporate America a lot.
Yes.
Because I find myself in those spaces a lot. And the moment I work in, like walk into those spaces, people like to have an entire bias, you
could just see their brain are working
version of who I am, what I do.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm always working overtime to just, go past those biases. So I have to maybe talk a little bit slower. Maybe I have to wear my fedora just to kind of, like remove all those waves that I walk into those spaces. Like literally I wear the fedora just for that. And there are other reasons as well, but like, how do you combat that as you now, because I see your work and I see that you are in all these rooms and with like all these, individuals that have done really good in their past, but like, how do you combat that bias that may be there? And I'm sure you're aware of that as you walk into those spaces.
Yeah.
Like, what's your strategy in like combating that? I'm sure there's a lot, but
there is. And I think if I were to identify one singular strategy, The most transformative relational connections and conversations happen one-to-one. I know that's not always possible, but I would say that first I have to lead and start with grace.
Right.
You know, my mother always tells me you have to, instead of lead and land on the worst first, even though history and time and experience, perhaps with non-persons of color, have told us a different story.
Right.
I'm going to go into every encounter assuming that people have the best intentions at heart. And then I find that people are more responsive for awareness, for education, courageous conversation in the sanctuary of relationship.
Right.
So I know when people see me, they meet me, they already have, and that's the power of the brain.
Right.
Even as their senses are taking things in milliseconds, probably faster than that, their brains are telling them a story based on safety and lived experience.
Right.
But what I find is the best way to break those down is to lean into curiosity. I give people sanctuary and safe space to ask me anything, from my hair, which they've done, to my dialect. It always seems to intrigue people that I look the way that I do and I talk the way I do. And what's interesting, I tell them the story. Well, you know, my mother, she was a little police with her ruler stick. And she said, don't say words like dang it, because that's not a word. So that actually more so came from just my mom's pouring into just making sure that my language is appropriate than anything else. So it's interesting. I make space for people to be curious about me as a woman of color, as a leader. I let them ask questions, but then I give them grace and safety to get it wrong. I also tell them I don't speak for every Black woman in Kansas City, in Missouri, in America. So my experience is uniquely my own. But then I try to build a rhythm and a relational consistency that I'm a safe person. So if you are not quite sure about how you feel or believe about bias or racism or these other things, you know you have a safe place with me, free of judgment, free of dispelling, free of discarding, and let's walk through the journey together. I think there are ranges of people when we talk about this justice conversation, this equity conversation.
Right.
Some people have to be the radical change agents. If we didn't have kind of those sojourner truths, we'd probably still be set back in times of the 50s and 60s. Where I have learned, it goes back to that blooming where I'm planted. I'm a safe convener of conversations for a lot of people. Right. And I have seen a lot of, particularly non-persons of color, wealthier people, people whose story is very different than mine, find that they can come into sanctuary with me without judgment, and I can provide them strength-based awareness. I can have a really radical, courageous conversation.
Right.
I can call them on their bias, but because we have relationship, it doesn't feel like insult. And I've seen people and their whole mindset, their whole ideals, everything they thought about the world for the last 40 years, I've seen it change right in front of my eyes over the course of relationship. So that's how I've dealt with that professionally or personally, as I invite people to know and to experience that I am a safe space for really the radical, the uncomfortable, and the courageous.
Right.
Yeah.
And my next question is going to take a little bit of a left field.
Okay, so, that's okay. Let's turn.
Just to give you a heads up.
Okay.
But yeah, do you think that, you know, like awareness, especially on like relationship building, is it exclusive to, people of color, specifically Black women?
Yeah.
And the reason why I ask is because, for example, with like Kamala, when she was running for office, you know, she was working on that area of like building trust, building like relationship.
Yeah.
And she always had to share her story before she even answered any question, because she wanted people to understand that she was raised by a single mom and all this different element, but still it wasn't enough. There was always pushback. Yeah. Even memes of her, like, you know, people saying, why is she always talking about her mom? Like, can we just answer the question? But she was trying so hard to build that relationship, but still it didn't work. And again, my question is like, do you think that's only exclusive to, you know, like people of color, mainly Black women? Because it's very common to my own, you know, like interactions with other, you know, Black women or like people of color. There's always a storytelling element. Even like entrepreneurship, we're always telling our stories first. Of course, yeah. But then anyone else can just walk in and just say, hey, man, I'm a software developer because I work in software. And it just happened yesterday. I met a guy who's a developer, and he has a concept of his startup and raised $1.8 million and only had to give away 10% equity. And I remember when I was raising money, I was raising $150K and they wanted almost 12% equity. And I had an entire concept ready, functional with clients.
Yeah.
And then that kind of blew. I was like, oh my God, this is weird. This feels like it's exclusive to people that look like us. So So what do you think of that?
I think data and history, and this isn't just my espousing, I think it's an affirmative yes. I think what you've experienced as a Black male, me as a Black female, is absolutely true. I just did a keynote earlier this week in Columbia, Missouri, and I talked about really the institutional and structural biases and racism, both implicit and unintended or implicit. And what happens there, again, it's just this power of the brain. It is the narratives and the stories our brain tells ourselves about what we believe to be true about people, their ability, their resources, their means, and their talent. And unfortunately, because of a history of Black individuals being inferior to other superior races in all of those aspects of the ecosystem, in housing and leadership and politics and science, you name it, we are always having to sell ourselves. I think what you saw with the presidential race and what I've learned from great mentors is that, yes, we are tired of telling our stories and introducing and qualifying ourselves first as a precursor to closing the deal.
Right.
But I've taken the approach, and it takes, I think, real maturity to do this, is if I can see every sales pitch as an opportunity to educate through empathy and through relationship. I would love to get the deal. I'd love to have the trust. What I rather have is you have a mindset shift. You have a transformation of the heart so that your children, your grandchildren come up, and the bridge, the gap between them seeing a Black person and just knowing that's a good human versus having to hear all of the things. It just happens. It is. And so I think for Black leaders, you have to decide, again, where do you want to be in this journey, in this justice mindset? I have a good friend, Rochelle Parker, the fabulous CEO of Girl Scouts right now. She doesn't qualify herself for anybody. She went to a historically Black college, is confident, proud in who she is. She knows her stuff. She knows what she's capable of doing, and she walks that way into rooms. I, as a byproduct of trauma, have had to go through some healing to be able to master that kind of confidence.
Right.
So I found my better place in the space is, let me walk through this explanation, this learning process with you through empathy, because I rather see your life, your mindset, your awareness transform more so than the transaction that we're trying to complete. But absolutely, I think data would tell us, history would tell us, we were not set up to have equal playing field awareness, credibility with our non-peers of color. And that's just the reality of the world. Will it ever change? Probably not on this side of heaven, but that's the reality.
I've tried on the education, side, because I'm just like,
it's exhausting.
Maybe education will be the only way, just so that we can, I was like, how do we go about this? Right. But then at the end of the day, to your point, I try to just lead with empathy. That's why in my title I changed it from chief, CEO now means to me chief empathy officer.
Which I love that. I've never saw that before. I'm like, if that's your greatest responsibility in life, you have done all you can. Giving people grace, but through empathy, helping transform and reframe their own lens. Man, that's a gift. That's a calling.
It's so like bizarre to me because I started calling myself chief empathy officer back in 2017. Is when I started I'm done fighting. From now on, I'm going to treat everyone with kindness.
That's good.
Just like how I want to be treated. And then one thing that people remember is the empathy portion. Every now and then I will, just yesterday, someone just sent me a message in LinkedIn, and then they were like, hey man, I heard that you are building an empathy company. I was like,
I love that. That's brilliant. I was like, write that down.
I was like, empathy company. Thank you for that.
That's great. I love it.
But yeah, to your point, just be nice to people, and hopefully that karma will just trickle down eventually.
It will. It will.
But it's very exhausting.
And I think about Kamala's, campaign and time. I think she had 107 days, and that's really hard because she took on the shoulder.
It's very incredible.
Centuries of harm and racism and hurt that are still. I mean, you could just look at the last iterations of policies and decisions, and just first that are happening, like in states of Georgia and where Missouri is, and a lot of things. So that's almost unreasonable to expect expect that type of transformation in 107 days. But what she did, she ignited an empathy movement that I think is being felt well beyond and outside of Black people. I think when we see 4 years from now, I think the trends and the understanding of the plight and the necessity of persons of color being in places of authority and privilege and posture, I think we will see some attitudes really change.
No, I mean, I can already see it because I'm like in like the fabric of the internet. Like,
they're talking. And people are curious, which is where we want them to be, because that's how change happens, you know?
No, like, you know, people are wanting to travel more, you know, they're wanting to learn because, you know, they saw something, they saw, you know, things that they were taught as a young child of what to aspire, and then they saw half of the population turn their back against it, and then they're like, now
it doesn't compute.
They're like, what is happening? Like, this person is right for this. But well, thank you for like, you know, even like acknowledging and answering that, because I try to be mindful of people's, you know, like their beliefs and whatever they want to support. Of course. But, now, I will offer for you real quick, one thing that makes me, I think, uniquely qualified for this vineyard that I'm planted in is my mother decided that for whatever reason, public schools was not just, they were not going to serve me well because of my trauma. They wanted to diagnose me and send me to an alternative school. So she did put me in Christian education, but it happened to be with mostly white people. I was one of only one individuals all 4 years in my high school. Now, years later, the byproduct of that was a lot of questions and misunderstanding of identity, and I had to work through that. But what it did afford me was an advantage and a vantage point about white life that I probably would have never had otherwise. So I didn't learn how to be different than myself. I learned how to appreciate how people think, how they live, how they do life. So when it was time to speak my truth and power, I had an audience, I had an understanding of how uniquely different their needs and how they understand information and awareness is. So again, I think God was very intentional about intersecting me in places where I could be a conduit for radical change. And he used really the byproduct of the broken to take me there. So. Beautiful. And like now you were working as a CEO of Cornerstone of Care. How did that happen? Because it's a very old, you know, like it's been around for 150 years,
154, right?
And now you're the face of the company. I was, you know, just trying to figure out how did that happen, and I would like to hear it from you. I decided not to look into it because I think from the source would be a great story to hear.
It's a beautiful story, and I'll keep it brief. But I was assigned to this position, whether it be spiritual or just, I think it was my time and purpose. I was following a very courageous leader who had been the CEO of the organization for 13 years. The organization saw a merger of 5 separate organizations in 2017. And so she had carried really the brunt of that on her shoulders and got it to a phenomenal place so that it was sustained to where it is today. And I was coming out of a very harmful environment in a professional space, the space where I talked about I was the one of only, trying to advocate for change, for cultural competency, and I was just physically, mentally tired. And so I had left that organization and went to a smaller nonprofit to really be quietly in a corner, nursing my wounds, and I wanted nothing to do with top line leadership. I was like, I'm done. I can't face this kind of harm and affront of harm again. My beloved friend, fellow peer, mentor of faith, Dr. Dred Scott, former CEO of the Boys and Girls Club and Civic Council of Kansas City, he called me one random day and he said, I know you know of Cornerstones of Care. I said, yes, what about it? He said, their CEO is moving on after 13 years. And he said, I prayed about it. And he said, for whatever reason, your name keeps coming to my mind. And I said, well, I know we share the same faith and we talk to the same God, and I'm going to have a conversation with him tonight, because I didn't hear that. You know, I wanted nothing to do with being the top. And I knew from my time with FEMA, I'm good with being the second in command. I'm an operations leader. You tell me what to get done, I'll get it done. I was so scared of having the responsibility and the weight of protecting people and this agency and its fidelity and its impact and just its reputation in my hands. So fast forward 4, 5, 6 weeks of really what I call rumbling in the arena. It was a lot of prayer. It was a lot of tears. Imposter syndrome was on fleek. I had tried to talk myself out of every possible reason of why I couldn't do it. My husband said, we're going to pray, that, Lord, if this is not for us, close the door and seal it tight. And what's interesting is for the next 4 weeks, I would intersect previous board members from 10 years ago, children and families who had just randomly somehow found me at my organization and was telling me their story. And oh, by the way, Cornerstones of Care would come up. So all of a sudden, the name, the service, the work, and then it was like a switch. I talked to my mom about kind of my own story and my journey. And I found out during the interview process that when I was a child in the Hickman Mills School District at my most broken and she needed help, the school district had made a referral for me to get school and home-based counseling and case management service. Spofford was the organization that provided that service. Spofford was one of the 5 organizations that merged and became Cornerstones of Care in 2017.
Wow. Full circle.
So more than 30 years ago, I had received direct support from the agency I was now calling to lead. So I couldn't have argued with that. So needless to say, I presented, had to do several rounds of panel interviews. And I remember there was a final interview and I was telling Dred what my plan was. And I had all my slides and I had to solve a problem was the project. And we were meeting for coffee and he looked at me, he looked at my slides. He pushed all of them away. He said, Meredith, this is nice. They're going to have no question that you are the most qualified person operationally for the job. He said, but you need to tell them your story. Just be real. So I was like, what? Like, you don't tell a very type A person who has spent weeks
move all this research.
Like, do you see this? This is like 48 slides.
Right.
He's like, Meredith, tell your story. For the next 24 hours, again, I reworked the whole thing, did the interview, and I went off script and I told the story. By the time I was done, there was not a dry eye in the room. What I found out later is I had competed against a panel of probably 40, 50 overqualified individuals, people who had run million-dollar companies, profit and nonprofit, and they chose me.
Wow.
And so in that moment, I thought, okay, this is what a divine appointment looks like, but this is what it means to lead with relationships. I can assemble the team, the smartest team, to be able to do what we need to do to sustain this organization. But it is the ability to help see, lift, support, and shepherd others that is the gift that they wanted for this time and this season.
Right.
And so that's the story. And that's what I do every single day today.
Wow, that's beautiful. That must be very, such a long journey to get to.
Oh my God. I wouldn't have said yes probably 7 years ago,
right?
If I'm being honest.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, like good for you for saying yes and like showing up for all the people there. How many employees do you manage currently? And I know you also manage families that you,
of course,
like support. And I would love for you to just talk about Cornerstone in general.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, Cornerstones of Care is a 155-year-old behavioral health nonprofit organization. Each year we serve about 15,000 children and families across Missouri and Kansas and beyond. We actually support 300 schools and school districts across 10 states. So our history, we were started by 10 philanthropic women in Kansas City as a small orphanage for children who cared for children who were displaced from their parents or lost their parents as a result of the Civil War. So over time, as the state changed its model for doing child welfare, so instead of states doing all the service work, foster care and adoption, prevention work, family work, they started contracting with community-based organizations. So over 100 years, 5 separate organizations stood up. They all had different niches and focuses. Some did residential care, some did elementary type care for young children, trauma care. So every one of those had a different focus. But again, like I said, they merged officially in 2017. So today we have been around and we do everything from intervention once children and families come on the radar of Children's Division. We try to keep families together. We believe that children and families belong together and whole, and that every child and family has the ability to try and heal and recover. Some, unfortunately, because of safety reasons, they have to seek separation as a part of the healing journey. So we do residential care. We have a residential campus. We do foster care and adoption. We probably support a little under 1,000 children in foster care on both sides of the state line, Missouri and Kansas. And then we have a whole education and training program. So again, like I said, we're in schools. We have this great program called Build Tribe that works with youth who are aging out of foster care. And as you may know, the statistics, many of them don't go on to higher learning. They end up homeless. Some enter the juvenile justice system. So this program wraps around them, gives them therapy, vocational training. They can choose choose a trade in 3 pathways: conservation, landscaping, culinary, or building trades. And many of them graduate into interdependence. So they find their life in society, they have job, they have the community, and now they're healed. So across all of the things that we do, we employ about 750 plus individuals across 16 offices and serve 15,000 children and families every year. So we have evolved. While we do a lot, I like to say it boils down to one child, one family, and it's usually a one-on-one case management relationship at a time.
Right.
It's the one time I get on my soapbox. We realize, we think of residential care, inpatient psychiatric, like the hospital. You want it there. We know it's necessary. And we know that there are some children and families that mentally there is just disparaging consequence if they don't have the right now help. Right. Cornerstones of Care stands on an ethos that let's follow the breadcrumbs back to the point of disruption and broken. Let's do all that we can until we've done all that we can to prevent youth from coming into the welfare system, foster care, or hospitals. So where you will see us today is in homes and schools and communities, in the streets, in the neighborhoods. Right. That's where crime prevention starts, in relationship with case managers, safe caring adults in the home at the little age, early on before broken gets too broken. So that's who we are today.
Wow. I mean, I'm just glad that they picked you, because I feel like your entire life was just building up for you to be in this role. And I can see that glow of you just feeling like I am in my place, and this is the right time for it. And
this is it. Such a time as this. I told my team the other day, I said, listen, you all just might as well build me a wing somewhere on an old campus. I'm not leaving. This is it. And that's another thing, I have learned about leadership. And I think my mother says, what I appreciate about you is your humility. And maybe it's a little bit of trauma to still not have enough confidence to know you are doing the darn thing. And I'll never take credit for that. I don't look to leadership hop for any reason. Yeah. I think, until someone tells me, until God or someone else tells me that the assignment is done, that I've done all I can, I've been placed here for a reason and for a time period. And so you get recruited, you get calls, and I'm just transactional leadership is just not a thing in my toolbox. So I'm here to help transform the system. Yeah. And
I'm going to ask you, also, I'm going to switch a little bit, but it's going to connect again.
Okay.
I had a guest, and he's the current superintendent for the St. Louis School District.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you know him, Dr. Michael Macklin.
No, I know the name, but I've never met him. Yeah.
Great guy to talk to.
Yeah.
But I had him on my podcast, and I was asking him a question about diversity, just DEI.
Yes.
And the question was like, what department is in charge of DEI? And I can tell that he wasn't happy about the question. And he laid it on me. He's like, DEI is not a department. It's a mindset. To me, that kind of blew my mind. I'm going to say, oh my God, yes. Like, because the whole problem with corporate America is like, they've put DEI into a department and they just let someone just deal with it. Yeah. And, most people don't even get involved in the program. And then that hurts people that are supposed to be like part of that, group of people that needs to be protected. And when I say that's just everybody, just humans in general, because the entire, U.S. government is the biggest DEI group out of anyone.
Absolutely.
Like the Senate, the House, when you look at it, they literally are the representation of DEI in my own, observation. And when he shared that, I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. And I would like to get your thought on that, just DEI being a mindset instead of a department. But also in your own role right now, like how does that play? Since you work with families and you also work with teams of 750 people.
Yes,
and then you have 1,300 families and kids and schools. So there's so many different elements of conflict could happen anytime. How do you maintain that safe space at the same time, while being aware of just diversity and like equity and like inclusion?
Of course. So what I've learned probably like the rest of America since 2018, or most recently, if you will, and I know this has been conversation that's happened for centuries, is that words really matter. And what happens is I think we see consternation with certain words and word usage. And so where I have seen breakdown in understanding and people kind of lower their guards is if you think about the business case or simply just the human case, like when you talk about diversity, if we all looked and thought and produced and performed and sounded the same, what a homogenous, boring, and just annoying world this would be. We would not tolerate that in any business. We wouldn't tolerate it in any church. We wouldn't, I mean, if you think about the foundation of democracy, it was built on this idea of creating a space, a policy, a practice, a framework to help shepherd and protect what was the diversity of the individuals who called America home.
Right.
And we know the history of how certain groups and people were left out of that. But if you boil that down and strip out all of the words and the politicism and all of the speculation and concern that has happened around diversity, equity, inclusion, really what we're talking about is just being good stewards of good human goodwill, one human to another. So I think where I've seen growth and just growth and awareness in this space, I absolutely agree with the superintendent. It's not a department, it's a way of life, it's a mindset. And it's my willingness to say that every life, every lived experience, even if I cannot relate and I don't understand, has value. And that should be the end and beginning. That's the cornerstone. So in our world, I think it was, I won't say it was easy. We have what's called the sanctuary model of trauma-informed care. We're certified in that model. It's based out of New York, and it comes with 7 commitments. And some of those 7 commitments are like growth and change, voice and choice, democracy, social learning, and responsibility. So we found that sanctuary model was basically an extension of DEI. So when we introduced the more formal language and the training, we realized as an organization, we were already doing this through our sanctuary model of trauma-informed care, seeing, supporting, serving, shepherding humans one to another. So we have been very intentional, unlike many organizations, when kind of the crest of the wave happened in 2018, 2019. We did not just go out and stand up a position. We did the baseline training, but we integrated it with our sanctuary model. We made sure that people knew this was simply just an extension and a focus to give voice to those people who tend to have no representation, no seat at the table. And it's like, I think I've heard this illustration, if your neighbor's house is on fire and yours is next door, your most important focus right now is to put the fire out at your neighbor's house. And so when groups of people and races say, my house is on fire, my home is on fire, my ability to feel safe and seen and loved is on fire, DEI is simply giving the priority, the safety, and the attention to make sure that those who are underrepresented, undervalued, and underseen have a safe place to belong and to heal. So in our world, we call it WIDE, welcoming, inclusive, diverse, and equitable. And I think that the big takeaway or the takeaway and the talking point is that we see it as no different than the extension of the sanctuary model to trauma-informed care that we already embody. And that is what's helped socialize it, made it embraceable, and made it understandable for both our internal staff and the world outside of us. It's less important to talk about the words and more so, what does the spirit of celebrating diversity, making sure there is equity and voice and choice for the children that we serve. If you look at who's coming into care, data says that we are underserving and underseeing groups of people. So if we are going to be true to our sanctuary model, we better prioritize fixing what they're not getting, fixing what we're doing, fixing how they're being underserved. So to me, it's a natural blend with the trauma-informed ethos that we already ascribe to. It's not ancillary. It's not something else. It is the heartbeat. It's the culture. It is the breath of our organization.
Absolutely. And again, like I can talk to you forever. And there's definitely going to be a part 2 to this. For the next
you better cut me off because I could talk forever. Clearly, I told you I'm a storyteller.
I'm a conversationalist, so I enjoy talking to people. And because I'm always learning something. But one thing that I want to, bring like some like attention to it, because I know it's not, you were more than even this, but I just saw that you were like recognized as like Kansas City's most influence. I can't even read this. Kansas City's Women of Influence.
Yes, they changed the name recently. It used to be Women Who Means Business.
Oh, gotcha. So now Kansas City's Women of Influence.
There you go. Yeah.
Like first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
I looked at their list. I was like, oh, well, now they're opening their eyes. It's like,
it's evolved. Yeah, it really has.
So like, congratulations to that. And like, how do you feel about that so far? And I know it's just another accolade, but you must have some feelings about it.
Some women might say exactly what you just said because they are so used to having positions of privilege and opportunity. I do not take lightly who I am as a woman of color, but most importantly, a byproduct of adoption. Everything about my life and my leadership journey defies every statistical odd. I am not supposed to be here, let alone be in this position. So how I feel about it is I am so humbled and blessed. I spent most of my journey outside of the local sector in Homeland Security. And then when I kind of came back home, it was in Eastern Jackson County. So to not be known really by anybody in Kansas City, to have been appointed for a position for a very well-known, prominent Kansas City-based nonprofit organization, one of the largest, if not the largest, and then to have this recognition less than 3 years into the role, that is a miracle in itself. And I think the one short headline I would say is it goes back to my ethos and my belief about people and trauma is that no child, no story is so far gone that it is not worthy and capable of healing, restoration, and an abundant life. So if I can use that recognition as an opportunity to tell the story and what's possible, I'm gonna ride that little coattail. I speak for the foster care girls. I speak for the domestic violence survivors. I speak for the girls who lived in their trucks and their vehicle for a period of time because they were afraid to go home. For the teenage moms who didn't think they would ever graduate college. So that's who I take that for, and I'm honored by it.
Oh yeah, like you are like the true like representation of I can and I will do it.
Yeah, I need that on a shirt.
You should. It's just been amazing just hearing your story.
Thank you. That means the world.
I've been aware of you and your work for quite some time now, but just to sit down and hear your story from the beginning to,
it's been a good
where
life.
you are right now. It's just beautiful. And I know a lot of kids just look up to you and your kids must be very proud. I just met them during your fundraising event and I was like, wow, they're huge kids. They're all tall.
We feed them well.
I was like, I got to talk to your husband and then he's like, they're big guys. I was like,
most of them are football players.
I only have a 7-year-old. Oh, that makes sense. They're all like way taller than me too. I was like, I need to tiptoe around that now. But we do have a closing, tradition here. And I like to, ask my guests, like, after everything we've talked about, which is a lot, like, how's your spirit right now?
How's my spirit? You did a check-in with me. So that I love that we do a community meeting check-in.
I have to because people always forget because I do notice a lot of leaders never check in with themselves as they're talking.
That's good.
So I like to close the conversation with like, how's your spirit? Like, how do you feel after having to talk about all of this?
Yeah. I'm trying to keep my composure because every time I get to tell my story, there is just this swell of gratitude. I think about where I was 20, 30 years ago, and I lie not when I tell you I used to live in my Bronco. And what people don't realize, and what I'm just now getting comfortable with telling as a part of my story as a teenage mom, is that there was a period of time where my twins were removed from my care because I was homeless and they were placed with my mother. And so not only did a lot of harm happen to me, the system really perpetuated that harm. So my spirit today is so thankful. There is a great gospel hymn that says, "It is well with my soul." I firmly believe, whether you're a person of faith or not, that every broken and every challenge in your life, if you allow it, can be used as a stair step to glory. And glory can be so many things. Right. It can mean physical health that allows you to play with your grandchildren. It could be graduating with that degree and being a first-gen, college grad. It could be a new immigrant to the country and opening your own business. So I'm a firm believer that, again, if you surround yourself with the right people and caring community, anything is possible, and I'm living proof of that. So thank you for giving voice and space and value to my story. I hope someone hears and understands, if you are in that space of uncertain, of what feels like fragmentation, decimation, whatever the bad adjectives are, you don't have to stay there. There's a God that loves you and a community that wants to lift you to life. So let them do it. Just lean into that courage.
Wow. Well, this has been very beautiful.
Thank you.
And I still have more questions, but we'll save
part
that for like the part 2.
Yeah.
And again, thank you so much for being here today and
Thank you,
sharing your
Ryan. It was
stories
my pleasure.
and just being a vessel for empathy. So
yeah. I love that vessel for empathy. I'm going to totally steal that and give you all the credit.
It's like I keep talking to all these smart people, so I have to be smart now, I guess.
I love it. No, that's beautiful. Thank you for that.
But thank you. Thank you for being here.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
And in closing, I want to share a message of hope for all the frontline managers and future managers out there. Think about all that you are instead of all that you are not. You are capable, brave, and significant, even when it feels like you are not. You've faced countless challenges but remain resilient. You've been hurt, yet you still stand proud and smile for your people. Embrace your journey, cherish those who uplift you, and remember, your worth is defined by the kindness and strength you show yourself first. Your imperfections make you unique and resilient. Keep shining because the world needs your light. Thank you for listening to Heliona Insight. Until next time, keep inspiring.